Okay, so this is your first tutorial into Photoshop. I'm going to be working in Photoshop CS3. Yeah, I know, it's old, but it's the version I've got, and it's the version I've paid for, so tough. There haven't been too many changes since CS3, so I haven't updated it or anything because there haven't been any huge breakthroughs. But if you have a different version, most of the tools are going to be the exact same. They're probably going to be in almost identical places. If I know of a difference between the versions, I will let you know as we kind of go through here. If not, just raise your hand or something. If I'm walking around, I'll try to help you and figure out where it might be. So this is basically what you see when you open up. You get all your toolbars and stuff like that, but we don't have anything to work with right now. So we're going to go to File, New, and this dialog box pops up. You can name your document right here if you want to. I tend to wait to name it until I save. Then yours may look slightly different here. It may come in with the default of pixels. If you know how big stuff's going to be in pixel size, great, knock yourself out. If you prefer metric, go for it. I personally prefer inches, so I can create a document that's, say, an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper at 300 dpi. A lot of your printers and stuff stick to 300 dpi. Not many printers go above that, so creating something that's more than 300 dpi is fairly useless, especially because if you were to print something at 600 dpi, the odds that you would be able to tell the difference between the 300 and the 600 from the naked eye, probably fairly slim. So I would stick to 300 dpi and below. To go below 300 dpi, I would check the printers and the plotters in the print lab and see what the maximum DPI they print at is. A lot of plotters, their maximum DPI is 150 DPI, so there's no sense in creating something that's going to be a fairly large file. You can see the image size down here at 32.1. That is strictly the kind of Photoshop file. That doesn't mean your JPEG is going to be this big or your PDF. Those types of things will be smaller than that. But if it only prints at 150 dpi, just make this 150. I'm going to keep this 300 for now. Looking down here, you have your different kind of color modes. Grayscale, if you want to do something in entirely grayscale, that's fine, go for it. I tend to keep stuff in color, and then if at the very end I want it to be grayscale, there's a quick little hotkey that'll change everything grayscale for you. That way you always have the option of color or grayscale, as opposed to if you go with this, then you're looking at everything in grayscale and it's kind of hard to tell what exactly you're working with. RGB color, this is the setting you would go for if you were going to present everything in a digital format. So if you're presenting something on a TV, RGB is the way to go. That is your typical kind of light sort of stuff. And if that's, hopefully you guys have taken like a basic physics class. If not, sorry, that was a little nerdy reference, I guess. RGB is light, CMYK is your pigments. So if you're going to be printing, CMYK. If you're going to be doing digital, you're going to be doing RGB. So the difference is not really all that noticeable, if at all, on screen. The difference is in when you send it to the printer. So it might look great on your screen. You could flip back and forth between RGB and CMYK and not notice a difference at all. It looks fine. And then you send it to the printer. If it's in RGB mode, it might print slightly off. You might have a red that looks a little more purplish. Things like that tend to happen. So background, we'll stick with white. You can go transparent or pick a random color if you want. I'll stick with white. All of the advanced stuff, don't worry about it. Tends to not be an issue. Okay, so when we open up, we get this kind of blank sheet of paper here. You'll notice mine has these rulers at the top and along the side. If yours does not, you can come up to View and either you have rulers here, or in some future versions it is buried under the Show tab. So just find rulers and click that on. The nice thing about the rulers is obviously you can see how big things are and kind of scale things out, but also if you grab the ruler, click and drag, you can create these guidelines. So if I wanted a 1-inch indent on the side of my paper and 1 inch off the top, I can click and drag those into place, and now I've created a kind of anchor point there where if I were to create shapes, it would snap to that point. These can be really nice when you're doing a big layout of maybe multiple images or text or things like that. These can be really nice for lining everything up and getting everything kind of looking crisp and nice and neat. So those are a big helpful tool. Over here down in the bottom right, this is something that I would get fairly familiar with, and when you're creating something you'll undoubtedly become familiar with it, just because this can be your best friend or it can be your worst enemy down here in the corner. If things get out of control and you end up with 50 layers on here and you haven't organized this well or you haven't named things well, you're going to be clicking around trying to figure out what's what an awful lot, and you're going to waste a lot of time trying to figure out what exactly is going on down here in the corner. So that is your Layers tab, and as you create multiple objects, it'll create a new layer for each one. If it's something that's huge, that's really easy to kind of click on, I tend to not bother naming it, but if it's a whole bunch of little stuff, I'll name each one. That way I can, as I'm working in the document, I can kind of navigate things a little bit easier. So that is your Layers tab. Down here on the bottom are a couple tools associated with each. Once you've created layers, you can kind of work with these kind of things and position things into folders and all that, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So the idea here is for you guys to get a basic understanding of how Photoshop works so that you can start your first assignment and sort of play around a little bit without jumping in completely blind. So some of the tools over here that I want to show you guys, these are your primary and your secondary colors here. If you're working with two colors, for the most part, you can set these two up. If you click on one, it'll pull up this tab. There's all of your colors. You can, if there's an RGB color that you know the numbers to, you can punch things in. So if your color was 56, 45, say 18, then it would select this brown color, which that is the RGB identification number for that. If you find colors online, a lot of times they will have an associated RGB or a CMYK color, and that can be really helpful for matching various things. So I'm going to stick with my green as opposed to a brown. And so that is your primary kind of color selection down here. Another useful tool will be this pen tool. So once you click the pen tool, you'll come up with this kind of dialog at the top that shows you all the options within the pen tool. You can create various shapes. You can do different layering techniques and stuff like that, and how this is going to create the shape. And then also there are these two options. So you have your normal pen, and then you have your freeform pen. So freeform pen is just how it sounds. You create a freeform object, and then it creates the shape. So that can be really nice if you have a tablet and you've got some sketching you want to do. Instead of having to scan things in all the time from your trace paper and all of your sketchbooks and that sort of thing. If you are comfortable using a tablet, you can sketch things out here and work ideas out and click different colors and highlight stuff and work all of your ideas out really quickly in a digital format and save them off, and then you can put them into presentations and stuff and they look nice and clean and crisp and everything, as opposed to blotchy and like your hand just smudged a whole bunch of graphite across your sketch, which tends to happen, but that's part of the allure of the hand sketch, I guess. But if you want it to be nice and clean and crisp, that's your go-to if you have a tablet, or if you are unbelievably good with a mouse, and you can go ahead and sketch your heart out by moving the mouse in a very precise fashion, all the power to you. That is an amazing skill, and one that I would question how long it took you to master. But that's the freeform pen tool. The next one is just your pen tool. This is probably one of your most used, just because you can click points and create shapes in an orthogonal fashion, and then when you come back to your final point, you get that little circle that hovers, and that'll finish the shape for you. Or you can also click points and create an orthogonal, or if I click and hold, I can create an anchor point and create various kind of bends to it, and they're always going to be tangent to that point. So my next point, if I just click rather than click and hold, it's always going to stay tangent to that. So it's going to go to my next point and then kind of swoop up and create a tangent into that other curve. And so I can create a whole bunch of different curves to this and then finish it off. So that's really nice, and something that you'll probably use a decent amount. But another aspect to this tool that's really handy is if you bring in a picture. So let's say I'll go to File, Place, and I'll bring in some sort of rendering here. Let's go with, we'll go with this. We'll just pick something random. Okay, so let's say I've got a picture here and I want to select just this book here. This tool can be really handy. A lot of people will go to these selection tools at the top here where you have your lassos. Your lasso is just kind of the free form. Obviously, that doesn't do a great job of selecting things there. But if I use my polygonal lasso, I can click points, just like with the pen tool. However, the kind of bad part about this is if I accidentally double click or I click 2 points too quickly, so if I'm flying around this thing and I click too quick, it'll finish that off there for me, which can be a nightmare. If this shape went down and around like this, now I just cut across and now I have to edit stuff out and add stuff in, and that can be a real pain because I can't go back. I can't undo that last click. Whereas with this pen tool, if I select, rather than a shape, a selection here or a path, I can do the same thing as the shapes. I can click my points all the way around here, and I'm just going to go real quick and not do a great job at this, but you guys get the idea. And then finish this off. Now I've created a path. If I right click, I can delete the path. I can make a selection based on that path. So if I make a selection, now it selects just that book, which is really handy when you're doing stuff like this, because if I were to go around and I accidentally click and had a small seizure here and screwed up my path, I can hit Control-Alt-Z and step backwards a few times and then keep going. So I would highly recommend getting in the habit of using the pen tool to select things as opposed to your lasso. It saves you a lot of headache when you end up making mistakes and stuff where you double click or you're just moving faster than the program can handle, and all of a sudden now you've got a whole bunch of selection that you didn't want or you want to back out of. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Another thing along here, obviously you've got your text. If you want to type something out, you've got your fonts, you've got your different styles and that sort of thing. But another aspect to text, let's type something in here, and let's go ahead and make this bigger. Let's make this huge so we can see what we're working with here. Okay, so there's your text. If you double click on this layer over here, so we just created this layer and it automatically named it based on what the text is here. So if I double click on the T here, it'll go back into the editing mode. I can type more, or I can do whatever. I can highlight this entire thing and change the color of it. Maybe I want to go to the green kind of color. I can also come down here, and if I want to switch the color and I want to switch to this color, I can eyedropper on that and it switches directly to that color. It's kind of a pukey, nasty green color. So that's one tool. And then you can change its, is it center, left adjacent, right adjacent, smooth, like certain ones you won't see any difference on this when you change between these. And then other ones, there will be a huge difference. So obviously this font doesn't have much of any difference between those. Now another part of text that's really nice here is this panel here. So if you go to character, you also have your different drop down for your fonts. You have your size of your text, but then you also have, if I were to make this go to say a second line here, see how that overlapped and that looks terrible? That's because of this. It's a 60-point font, but it's only giving me a 14-point difference from line to line. So if I change this to 60, that is the standard kind of jump from one section to the next. However, if I wanted it to be more, I can increase that. I could make it 55 as opposed to 60 and make it a little bit closer in between there if I wanted to. I can change this sort of stuff, which this changes the spacing between letters. So if I go -50, it crunches all these letters together a little bit more. If I go to +50, it spreads them out a little bit more. Obviously 0 is the default. So this down here has to do with the entire thing. So if I want this to be 150%, this is the horizontal, so it's going to stretch it that way. If I make this 125%, that's going to stretch it vertically 125%. So I can also change the color. You can make it bold. So this is kind of a fake bold. Sometimes if you get really fine text and you click on that, it'll increase the boldness of it even more than a standard bold would, which can look decent. It can also look terrible. So it depends on the font. And then here's your italics, back and forth. You can force all capitals, or you can also force small caps. So small caps are basically, so if I were to type test, and rather than full capitals, I make it lowercase, it'll make the lowercase capitals as well, but just a smaller version. Some of you being architects, that's kind of an architect-y type font, I suppose. And then this is also where you can do superscripts and subscripts and stuff like that. You can underline, or if you're editing something or you just want to show something crossed out, you can cross it out. So that is another nice little panel to be familiar with text. This is your paragraph thing. You can show indents. You can also force hyphenations or not. So if you have a big block of text and it's hyphenating a whole bunch of words along the side, click that off and it will jump that word to the next line. That can be helpful when you're doing big blocks of text with layouts and things like that. So that is your text kind of tool. Next, we're going to get into kind of your shapes over here. So these are your standard shapes, lines, rectangles. So they are exactly what they sound like. If you do a polygon, you can set the sides to say 8 and click and drag, and it'll create the shape. Obviously, this is the same as the pen tool up here, but I can jump that to shapes. So if I want to make it a shape, it'll make it a shape. But if I wanted to select, for whatever reason, an octagon right out of the middle, I can. But how often does that happen? Not very. A few other things of note. You've got your burn tool here. Let me bring that picture back here. We'll pick this one and bring that back just to show a few things. So when you bring a picture in, it'll automatically set it as a layer over here. If you want to edit it in any way, you have to rasterize it. So rasterizing essentially pixelates the image to whatever DPI you have here. If you're not going to edit the image in any way, don't rasterize it. It'll keep it a higher quality and just a better overall image to work with. So I'm going to rasterize this so I can show you guys these tools. So you've got the dodge, burn, and sponge tool. Burn is probably one of your most used of those three. So I can say shadows, midtones, highlights. The default's pretty good, and I can also choose various brushes, what type of brush I want to use. I'll go ahead and stick with basic here so that I can just show you guys what this does. So exposure 8%, that's just a very minimum, very low amount. That's probably usually what you're going to go with this, so you can kind of fade it in. Like right now, you're not seeing much of a difference, but if I keep going over this, you see how it starts to darken it. And the more I go over it, the more it darkens. So this looks like it's just making it black, but if I go over something that's colored, it kind of starts to enhance some of the colors a little bit too. And you can start to create shadows and stuff like that here. So if I wanted to enhance a shadow underneath the countertop line, I can start to do something like that. That doesn't look great, but you guys get the idea. So that's shadows, or that's your burn tool, and you can increase this. So instead of me having to fade it in a whole bunch, now it does it real quick. I don't know how useful that is, but at the same time, it is an option. So you can adjust how much it does it each time. So Control-Alt-Z is step backwards, which takes you back out of what you just did. However, at a certain point, like right there, I can't go backwards anymore. So you have a certain limited amount of stepping back that you can do. So next tool is your dodge tool. So similar idea, except this brightens. This is the opposite of your burn tool. So then finally your sponge tool. So mode desaturate or saturate. So basically what this does is certain aspects it'll desaturate or it'll increase saturation in certain areas. So if I want to saturate this bowl of fruit here a whole bunch, I can kind of come in here and start to really click on it and start to enhance the colors of those. So as you can see, it's really starting to bring the reds, and the bowl starts to get a little funky looking, and they look like really, really ripe bananas. So those are your three tools there. Another three tools, your blur, your sharpen, and your smudge. These, I don't know how much you would use these, but if for whatever reason you wanted to blur something or sharpen it, they work in the same fashion as these three did. You click on one, it asks for a brush, it asks for the strength, and then you kind of go back and forth over top of it. This is your gradient tool. So gradient or paint bucket. So if you had a selection or an area selected, and you just grabbed your paint bucket, and it's going to default to whatever your primary color is, and I click there, so it identified a certain area here, and it's being blocked out by these tiles here. So I could paint bucket individual tiles if I wanted to, or obviously here it knows that this line isn't as prominent, and based on the tolerance, so 32, it jumps to that whole thing. But if I knock this down to say 5 and click there, it's only going to fill in just a little bit. It doesn't jump near as far. So you can start to play with your tolerance. You can also start to play with your opacity, so that starts to fill it a little bit less. So depending on what you want to do, that can be useful. Another aspect of this tool is the continuous aspect here. If I put this back at, say, 50, and I don't want this to be continuous. Continuous means it searches for the boundaries around this. So it looks at this shape and then goes until that color within the certain tolerance is bounded, and then it's going to fill that whole area. If I don't want it to be continuous, it's going to look in the entire drawing for that color and fill every aspect of it in. So if I click now it filled that glob, I suppose, whatever you want to call that. So that can be useful at times, and in the future I'll show you where that can be useful, but for now you know kind of basically what that does. Next, this is your eraser tool. You can start to erase various aspects. So if you create a layer and you want to fade it in some weird way, you can grab a different brush. So I can go to, say, my natural brushes here and select, some sort of splotchy element here and start to fade these kind of things in and out. So this is kind of like a spray paint sort of thing. Or I can kind of drag it across and have kind of a jagged edge sort of look. So that can create sort of an artsy look if that's what you're going for. You've also just got your standard eraser and that sort of thing. These are your art brushes. These can be a little tricky to use. I would stay away from them until you've kind of dealt with some of these other tools, and then you can kind of get into those. This is your paintbrush. It's similar to kind of just drawing freehand. But you can select different brushes to it. So if I wanted to click that one, now I've got a certain color with that brush, and I can go ahead and paint, various looking things and kind of create whatever look I'm really going for there. Let's see, you've also got the pencil tool. Pencil is exactly what it sounds like. You just make a thicker version of it, and you can kind of draw just like your paintbrush tool. This is crop, so just what it sounds like. If I want to crop my image down to that, I can click and drag it. You hit enter, and it crops it. So can be useful if you've got an image like this and say I only wanted to show that much. I can crop it. This is your magic wand. It's not near as cool as the magic wands that you might be thinking of, but it can be useful. So same thing as before, you've got your continuous kind of option here where if I click on that color, I've got a tolerance of 30. It selects all of that color within the entire kind of drawing. But it can also be useful from the standpoint of if you're trying to select, like let's say I just want to select all of the white in these windows here, and I'll go continuous and select that. Now I've got a perfect little selection around that, and if I wanted to show something out the window, I could find an image and place that there and then delete everything around that. If I select this window and let's say I place something here that I want to see through the window, but I want to delete everything outside the window. I don't want to delete my selection. I want to delete the opposite of my selection. Control-Shift-I will invert your selection. So select the opposite of what you currently have selected. So Control-Shift-I will flip back and forth. You can also go up to, oh man, I haven't gone up to here to use that in a while. But there is an option up here to select. There's select and then inverse. So if I hit select inverse, it'll go to the inverse. So those are your basic tools for the entire thing. I've already shown you kind of the polygonal lasso and the good and bads of that. But the goods and bads of that can be, it can be useful at times, but it can also be a real frustration if you're moving quick and it starts to kind of close up on you before you want. So this is also another selection tool. It's just a little more regimented than your lasso, just straight kind of selections. If you hold shift while you select, it'll keep it at a perfect square rather than a rectangle. No matter where your cursor goes, it'll create a perfect square. If you release shift, obviously you can make any sort of rectangle you want. This is one of the most useful tools. They call it the move tool, but as you get more and more layers here, so let's say I wanted to create, let's say I started to place a whole bunch of objects in here, so I'll place a few other things in here. Okay, so what I've got here is I've got a bunch of things, and when you create a big document and you have a whole bunch of stuff layering on top of each other, you're getting a lot of layers blending back and forth. that can be kind of a pain in dealing with your layering over here. If you've named it appropriately, you can usually quickly find what you want and click on it and be good to go. But sometimes a faster version is if I hit Control click, it'll instantly select whatever layer is on top that I clicked on. So this is that that tile texture right there. So if I Control click on that, it'll jump to that one, as you can see highlighted here. If I want to jump to Naverne Quartz, if I Control click on that, it'll jump to that one. Now, these overlap here. If I Control right click, it'll show me all of the layers here that are underneath there. So then I can click whatever one I want. So let's say I want to go all the way back to my main image, and I click there. So now I'm working with this one, which can be handy. When you've got a whole bunch of stuff on top of each other and you just want to select one thing, Control, right click will bring all of that up. So a few hotkeys for you guys here. Control Shift N brings up this menu, which creates a new blank layer for you. So if I hit OK, now I'm on this layer, and if I were to, let's say I wanted to paint something here, and I'll use my brush, and I paint a whole bunch of stuff, and then it's on a different layer than my other stuff. It's really nice to be able to paint on new layers and create whatever look you want on top of an image, because if I create a whole bunch of stuff on top of here, I can't go back to my original image. Whereas if I have a new layer that I'm doing all this on, I can always turn that layer off and have my original image here. So it's always good to have stuff on multiple layers. And a little tip, a little late to the game, but something to keep in mind. Whenever you have an image that you're going to edit, at the very start, duplicate that image. So you can duplicate here, or Control J duplicates that image. And then just turn the bottom one off. That way you've always got a copy of your original in the file. And no matter what happens to this one, if things go awry, and this one gets a little out of control and away from you, and then you end up hating it, you can always go back to the original and kind of start things again, which can be kind of handy. Another hotkey that's really useful is Control T. So Control T brings up the transform menu, and all of these things that I'm showing you hotkeys for are also they can be found up here. But Control T brings up this little surround with grips where I can resize the image, or just like the marquee tool, if I hold Shift, I can proportionally size it back and forth. But another aspect, once you hit Control T, if I right click, it'll give you the free transform, which is the one we already seen, and then scale, rotate, skew, distort, perspective, and warp. So rotate is just what it sounds like. It's rotating the thing. Skew gives you the same anchor points, but when I grab one, it'll drag just that anchor point up and down, left and right of that certain point. You can also grab this middle one and shift the whole image side to side. So that's skew. Distort grabs the individual point, and just like skew, it'll move that individual point, but now it doesn't bind itself to vertical or horizontal. I can move it kind of wherever I want to go. Now, as you can see here, once I get to a certain point, it doesn't want to be able to move that image anymore, which, because the image gets a little crazy, it decides that it doesn't want to do that anymore. So there are limitations to it. This center point kind of dictates where it's scaling about and where all this is happening. So if I move this down here, it changes how this image kind of moves. So obviously it changed right about here where that wants to move. But if I go to free transform and I start to scale stuff, it's going to be around that point as opposed to around the center here. The biggest difference is in the rotate tool. So obviously now it's rotating around that point as opposed to the center. Perspective. So this is another instance where this point matters. So rather than it being right in the center, if I put it there, now it's going to start to create a perspectival kind of view here. I can also distort things back and forth, so it starts to bring things closer or further away. That can be useful depending on what kind of look you're going for. And then warp is just what it sounds like. You can create a custom, they have defaults, or you can create a custom one here. So basically what you do with warp is you grab individual points, and each sector is kind of its own thing, and you can start to create kind of trippy, warpy sort of things and move various points in and out. You can start to bulge things and, you know, create whatever look you're going for. So those are your basic kind of transform tools. Finally, I'll show you a few layering options here. So if we bring these back here, and I'm going to pull this one to the top. Okay, so useful part about this is this option here, and then obviously you can see you've got an option for opacity, so I can change the opacity of that layer and how it kind of displays itself, how see-through I want it to be. But also what can give things kind of transparency is this drop-down menu here. So this can be really kind of interesting to layer things one on top of the other and create different kind of combinations of these different blending modes. So multiply is one that you'll use probably a lot, and basically what that does is it eliminates all of the white in an image and lets kind of the color or the darker spots kind of show through. So if I hit multiply here, there's a certain amount of white that's in this shape, in that orange. So obviously, since it's not black, it has some white to it, and it allows that transparency to start to show through, and then I can start to see the layers behind. Whereas color burn has another effect. Some of these I couldn't even tell you what the basic principle of them is, but they are fairly easy to kind of cycle through and see what look you want. So the darker color one, I can tell you, darker color, no matter if this layer is on top, it's going to show the orange wherever that is the lightest color. So like over here, it was here. However, this silver is darker than that is, so it's going to show the silver, not the orange. But on the cabinets and some of these spots, it's the lighter color, so it shows. It's the darker color. Sorry about that. It's the darker color, so it shows. Whereas if we go to lighten, it's going to show the lighter color, and it shows various different aspects of that. So then screen, and there's a whole bunch of different options here that you can start to play with. Overlay starts to show through, but it gives you the same kind of tone. Difference, that one, I don't know that I've used difference a whole lot, but you can start to layer some of these one on top of the other and create some different effects, which that can get into your more artsy sort of rendering styles when you start to layer different things and get a certain look going. So for the most part, that is your basics. It'll give you guys a good starting point and a good jumping off spot. So for your first assignment, have fun and mess around with this as much as possible, and just kind of play with it.